Out here, the West ain't just dust and gun smoke, it's blood, betrayal, and legends carved in iron. These are the forgotten tales of outlaws, lawmen, and drifters chasing gold, vengeance, and redemption. Welcome to Dust and Iron Tales. Rattlesnake Gulch wore the sun like a hot scarf, a canyon of jagged light and older grievances. It was a narrow, sun-baked corridor where trails tangled like spilled threads and diamondbacks kept time with the heat. Most prospectors crossed only as far as the shade offered by a stubborn rock and a rumor of a massive mine seen deep within. Eliza the surveyor scoffed at curses, a woman of science whose map smiled back with iron certainty. Her obsidian compass, a relic said to point toward hidden truths rather than north, rode at her wrists like a stubborn moon. The sun blistered the rocks as she stepped into the gulch with notebooks, hammers, and a patient, stubborn nerve. Sealed as the rattler, Kincaid appeared at the bend with a dry grin, his gang shadowing him and thirst for the gulch's water and greed. He snarled that the gulch belonged to him and that the odd trinket had better be handed over. Eliza looked him in the eye and said that the gulch belonged to no one, that her compass chose its own path. When Kincaid barked for her equipment, the ground beneath them shuddered and a deep rattle rolled through the rocks. The compass needle leapt spinning, then steadied toward a dark cave mouth that yawned like a secret. Heads up, Kincaid, Eliza sang, the gulch is speaking, as dust swirled in the air filled with the dry, sudden thunder. A section of the canyon wall buckled behind the gang, sending a shower of stone and gravel down into the dust. The tremor faded, leaving silence thick as flour and a plume of fine dust like a pale snowfall. Kincaid's face bled pale at the sight of the cave the compass insisted on, fear flickering like a fever behind his greedy eyes. Eliza's voice stayed calm as geology while her eyes tracked the compass's glow in the dim as if the obsidian could breathe. She suspected the true secret lay not in gold, but in a virtue of the gulch itself, something ancient that demanded respect more than climb. The cave mouth yawned wider, revealing a passage carved with unseen hands and a scent of damp earth and old rain. They stepped forward together, Eliza leading with the compass and Kincaid trailing like a man who had already lost more than he would admit. In the tunnel's hush, the compass pulsed once, and the walls whispered of a treasure older than gold, the truths of Rattlesnake Gulch, waiting to be claimed by those who listen. The air tightened as the pulse faded, leaving a tremor of sound that traveled through bone. Footsteps appeared where none should be, a line of footprints in dust that vanished when looked at directly. The voice in the stone grew steadier, a chorus of angles and echoes. Not all gold shines, it whispered. Some truths require loss to be seen. The map, in the palm of the protagonist, warmed, aligning with unseen constellations on the wall. They pressed over to the rough surface and heard an old river singing beneath the mineral veins. A narrow passage unfurled, not a corridor but a memory of a path long walked by those who came before. The air tasted of copper and rain, and the floor hummed with the memory of hoof boots. A sigil etched and sprang to life, tracing a route of hidden ledges and safer steps. They stepped forward, guided by the sigh of the canyon and not by fear. The walls breathed, shifting the rock into shapes of faces and audience waiting for a tale to end. The treasure, they understood, was the truth that could rewrite their own histories if listened to properly. They reached a chamber where the ceiling dripped with pale quartz and the air carried the scent of sage and old gunpowder. On a pedestal of weatherwood rested a single disc of glass that caught the light and turned it into a map. The map pointed not outward, but inward, toward a memory jar sealed with a cork of bone. When the cork gave way, a chorus of whispers poured out in a language of sighs and clear bells. The truth emerged as the name Rattlesnake Gulch was not a place, but a memory kept by the rock itself. Those who listened learned that the gulch had once saved a dozen wanderers by singing their names back to them. The warning was simple: take only what is owed in listening. Leave what is remembered intact for the next years. The protagonist stepped back, pocketing the disc, and felt the wall seal softly behind them, as if the cave itself approved the choice to carry the truth forward. They stepped forward into a corridor that hummed with a pale, electric glow. The disc warmed gently in their pockets, as if listening to a heartbeat only they could hear. Stalactites leaned like patient judges, casting vain shadows on the stone floor. A distant drip echoed, and with it came a soft, almost respectful silence. They kept their pace steady, not daring to rush the moment that had finally arrived. The walls bore faint inscriptions, now bright with a silver glimmer that seemed to answer their breath. The ceiling opened to a low dome where the air smelled of rain and old memory. On the far wall, a circle of light formed, pulsing with a rhythm that matched their pulse. The disc in their pocket grew light, as if shedding the weight of consequences. They reached the dome chamber and laid a hand against the cool, Smooth stone, listening for a sign. The sign came as a whisper, a line of heat tracing the air and then fading to nothing. They stepped back, letting the light wash over them and reveal the path beyond. The path spiraled downward, not deeper, but inwards, as if the cave sought to reorganize memory. Footsteps rose behind them, but the chamber stayed still, as if listening to the decision they had already made. A wind rose in the tunnel, carrying the scent of rain and something like old paper, the smell of evidence. Every choice they had ever made seemed suddenly measurable in the echo of their footsteps. The disc whispered again, a soft syllable that could be nothing more than a name, or perhaps a vow. They stepped onto the path and watched the way forward unroll like a map printed in light. A voiceless chorus of stone seemed to approve, creaking softly in assent as if agreeing with fate. With the cave behind them and the disc secure, they walked on, carrying the tree toward whatever light waited ahead. The air grew warmer as they left the cooled cave, and the disc hummed softly in its case. Ahead, a ridge rose, its edges etched by dawn's pale gold. They moved in measured steps, footprints filling with a quiet, careful certainty. The forest beyond whispered with wind and memory, as if the trees knew what they carried. Every footfall sharpened their nerve. Every breath steadied their resolve. They paused at a stream and watched the disc reflect the sky like a small, captive sun. One of them set down the pack and opened it to check the seals, ensuring nothing shifted. A gull cried somewhere beyond the pines, and the sound paraded with the disc's low murmur. The rumors of pursuit rose and fell like heat mirages, but no pursuer appeared. They pressed on toward a break in the forest way. The light pulled on the ground. In that light, stone turned to path, and the path to destiny, if such a thing existed. A distant bell tolled once, twice, and they did not look back. The disc surface cooled in its case, its glow dimming to a patient ember. They spoke little, letting their steps write the plan in the dust of the road. The fox tracked their progress for a moment and then vanished into ferns, leaving a quiet respect in its wake. The horizon widened as if the land itself were inviting them to begin. The canyon opened like a mouth, and they walked through with a careful, almost ceremonial pace. Somewhere beyond, the light waited not as a weapon but as a secret promise. They thought of those they left behind and decided not to forget, to carry their hope as surely as the disc. The road ahead shimmered with possible endings, and they stepped forward into it, shedding fear. The air tasted faintly of rain and possibility. The road sang under their boots, a quiet melody that seemed to know their names. Trees leaned in, listening, their branches brushing the shoulders of the travelers like old friends. A fox crossed at a distance, pausing to study them as if weighing their chances. They laughed softly, surprised by their own courage, and kept walking. The shimmer thickened into a threshold where choices hung like lanterns in a fog. One lantern pulsed bright, a path toward a harbour town they had dreamed of since childhood. Another swung away toward a mountainside fortress where they could prove their mettle. They did not grab for certainty. They let curiosity tug them toward whichever light held a story they could live. The road bent, keeping secrets as long as it could, then revealed a small village built from memories. In the village square, the clock tower struck a time that sounded like a heartbeat. A street vendor offered bread warm as summer sun and a cup of tea that smelled of distant oceans. They accepted, not as a test of worth but as a pause that allowed breath to catch up with longing. When they left the square, the shadows behind them seemed to melt into friendly silhouettes rather than threats. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from a distant hillside, carrying the scent of cinnamon and rain-warmed earth. The road grew both wider and more intimate, as if it were walking beside them and listening to their thoughts. They realized endings were not locks but invitations to begin anew with different sides of themselves. Side by side, they stepped into a corridor of stars that appeared where the road cracked open like a seam in the night. Each star hummed with a name they might become if they chose to listen, to trust, to risk again. And with that quiet agreement, they moved forward, carrying a pocketful of dawn and the certainty that fear, once shed, was lighter than air. They walked through the waking city gates, where glass towers reflected the color of citrus dawn. The streetlights blinked out like cautious fireflies as they passed. A cat padded along the fence, eyelids heavy with morning, and they paused to let it lead the way. In the hollow of the pocket, the dawn warmth hummed softly, a reminder of promises spoken in whispers. They spoke little, letting the rhythm of footsteps write the next sentence. A ferry horn murmured somewhere offshore, carrying connotations of distant harbors and returning. The road rose gently toward the bridge where the sun would lay a gold edge along the hills. Their shadows stretched long and patient, then shortened again as the sun claimed the sky. A vendor's bell rang somewhere behind them, and a child laughed at nothing and everything. They found a stream of quiet among the noise, a pause where the day could rise at its own pace. The pocket of dawn grew warmer, almost ticklish, as if it remembered the night. Their hands found each other, not in plan but in instinct, and a grateful breath passed between them. They traded a look that meant, we are not afraid to stumble, only to climb. The horizon softened into a pale fire, and it felt like a door opening inward rather than outward. Later, a memory drifted up, a thread from some past life where fear wore a uniform and never fit. They tucked the memory away for later stitching, choosing the present seam instead. The wind spoke in a language they almost remembered, and they answered with a quiet nod. The path widened, granting them room to breathe in time with the tide of the day. At the edge of a courtyard, a sparrow settled on a railing and watched them, patient as a witness. They stepped forward again, the dawn pocket now a lantern in the palm of their minds. The air tasted of rain and cured wood as if the world remembered old storms. Their steps found a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the distant city. The lantern dawn cast a pale guide across rough stones and hollow doors. They didn't hurry, nor did they linger. They moved with quiet purpose. In the pocket of morning, a map unfurled itself, drawn by memory rather than ink. Each doorway yielded a whisper, some friendly, some wary, all curious about who carried light. They passed the statue of a sailor whose eyes seemed to blink with salt water. The lantern glow softened the statue, turning iron into something almost teachable. Go quiet somewhere beyond, and the city answered with a distant subway, a rumor of arrival. They reached a plaza where the wind tugged at banners that had never hung straight. The lantern, in their minds, cast a compass needle that didn't point north, but toward a truth they hadn't named. A child stood at the edge, holding a cracked music box that hummed a lullaby older than the hills. The music box paused, and the childish eyes met theirs with astonishment and trust. If you're really listening, you've already begun, the child said, in a voice too grown and too small. They knelt, fingers brushing the lantern's edge, and felt ideas rise like breath in cold air. The dawn pocket, now a lantern, released a trail of sparklers that spelled out a sentence in the air. The sentence spoke of a threshold between saying and being, between fear and wonder. When they stepped through it, the world widened, not larger, but looser, like a spine stretching. They discovered that every choice had a color, and every color carried a memory of a decision not yet made. Behind them, the city exhaled a sigh of relief, and they realized they were no longer following a map, but becoming one themselves. The pavement warmed under their soles as if the city itself approved of their new direction. Street lamps blinked in a slow semaphore, spelling out routes only they could read. A stray cat trotted ahead and paused as if waiting for them to catch the next symbol in the air. The air tasted like rain and iron, a scent that anchored memory to the present moment. They found a doorway that wasn't there before, a doorway that felt like a portal between maps. Inside was dim, but the walls breathed with faint graffiti that rearranged to show a heading toward dawn. Each step stitched a thread in the air, forming a tapestry they could step into if they believed enough. They realized every corner had a small echo of a choice they'd made earlier, now curved into a compass. The city didn't vanish around them. It leaned closer, listening, ready to bend to their will. They touched the railing and felt the line of travel tighten, as if the city were tracing their pulse. The bus sighed to a halt inside a tunnel of neon, offering a seat to whatever future waited. They chose not to board, because the map had become a habit they no longer needed. Instead, they walked, and the sidewalks themselves widened to accommodate their thoughts. Street vendors stacked crates into towers that hinted at horizons, and they climbed the ladders of possibility. Windows spilled stories of people who had traversed similar routes and found themselves elsewhere, wiser. The night refused to stay dark, spilling constellations across rooftop chimneys that pointed forward. They realized the city was teaching them not to navigate around danger but to negotiate with it. Their breath lined up with the cadence of traffic, and the rhythm steadied into a map they could recite aloud. When dawn glittered on steel, they knew the map had become theirs to redraw for others who might follow. And so they walked on, carrying a living cartography inside them, ready to guide not from the front, but from the intention of each step. They moved in a rhythm that felt like weather in the bones. The living cartography hummed with faint nerves, tracing lines that only they could see. When they paused, the map beneath their skin rearranged itself, offering new routes spoken in soft pulses. They learned to listen to the creak of wood, the whisper of fabric, and the way breath bent toward unknown corners. The townsfolk gave them merry glances, then found themselves following the drift of their steps like a tide. A sparrow landed on the back of the living cartography, tilting its head as if reading the inked weather on the map. The cartography spoke through tremors, sketching roads that curved away from fear and toward memory. Sometimes they forgot where they had started, but the map never forgot where they were meant to go. They spoke little, letting the map do most of the talking in a language of thresholds and doorways. At dusk, the sky pressed close and their shadows merged, making a single traveler with many possible destinations. They learned to walk around obstacles, letting intention bend time until a river granted passage. The letting map refused to be rushed, insisting that patience was a compass as much as any steel needle. They crossed a town square where laughter lingered like spice, and the map drew a route through stories long forgotten. A child ran beside them and asked if the map could show a way to morning, and the map obliged by sketching a sunlit corridor through memory. They promised the child they would carry those mornings forward, in case someone else forgot how to wake up. Night arrived and the stars refracted into tiny constellations along the lines of the map, guiding them by micro sparks of old routes. They learned that every step carried a choice, and every choice rewove the map into something kinder. At the edge of a forest, the trees leaned in, listening to the living ink and offering a chorus of rustling agreements. They stepped through the threshold between one step and the next, and found a road that felt both near and deeply familiar. So they kept walking, with the map breathing softly in their veins and the intention of each step pointing the way toward whatever new horizon awaited. The road unfurled beneath their feet, a ribbon of dusk and dust. The map in their veins soothed into a patient, almost musical rhythm. Each step drew a thread towards somewhere they hadn't even known they were seeking. A hillside sighed, and a stream answered with a murmur that sounded like old names. They passed a thorny hedge where a lone sparrow watched them pass with one bright eye. The horizon kept changing its mood, sometimes a blush of orange, sometimes a pale rumor of green. They thought about the road not taken, then let the present take its own hold on them. Their pockets held nothing but a pebble each and a memory or two of someone they never were sure they'd see again. The map-air's breath grew warmer as the day warmed, and the world seemed to tilt toward possibility. At a bend, the forest scented of cedar and rain, and the air tasted faintly of something like citrus and fear. They found a stone bench carved with initials, and a moment its pose offered itself as a bookmark. The sun slid lower, painting the grass in long, shy shadows that crawled toward their ankles. A distant bell rang somewhere, perhaps the sign of a village that hadn't learned their names yet. They ate a crust of bread that tasted of wind and dry laughter, crumbs scattering like tiny comets. The map whispered again, a gentle insistence, and they moved on with the certainty of a door swinging open. They crossed a stream on stepping stones that sent cold fingerprints up their shins. A fox washed from the underbrush, then trotted away as if guarding a secret only travelers would understand. Night began to uncurl its dark, threaded with constellations that looked back with curious patience. They lit a small fire, not to conquer the dark but to invite it into conversation for a while. When the flames settled, they realized the horizon had shifted again, not away from them but toward them, inviting something they hadn't anticipated. From the ember street dusk, silhouettes resolved into a procession of shapes they thought they'd left behind.